The thought has always been in the back of our heads, but we never actually sit down and think about it, let alone talk about it. Any visit to a toy shop, department store, or online market will quickly reveal that practically everything, from clothing to home goods, are produced in China, a global center of manufacturing. But don't just take my word for it. In 2020 alone, China was the United States' third largest goods export market. US exports to China that year were close to 124.5 billion, which was up 16.9% from 2019, 35% from 2010, and a staggering 549% from 2001. Whilst you may not be surprised by this, do you actually understand why so many things come from one place? What is it about China that attracts the eyes of so many businesses around the world to its manufacturing facilities? And is China really selling us a product, or instead a plan for world domination? To begin with, it wasn't always like this. China was a lone wolf in the economic race, and for the first 30 years, a communist country, meaning the government, and the government only, controlled businesses and profit, and dictated what sorts of shipping and goods came in and out of the country. This led to China making little to no contact, aka business deals, with other countries. This communist ideology was led by none other than Mao Zedong, a Chinese communist revolutionary who led the Communist Party. But when Mao eventually hit the sack, the Chinese government began to grow fond of the next best thing, capitalism. This introduced the meteoric rise of factories in special economic zones around the country. It just didn't stop. There were far too many. It was getting to the point where citizens living in these zones were essentially forced to inhale these toxic fumes. These toxic factories started off producing knockoff versions of Western products, as you may know. Things like shoes, toys, and clothes. I mean, yeah, the quality wasn't the best, but there was a global demand for it. As we moved a couple years down the line and the number of people buying these products increased, so did the size and the number of these factories. And this gave rise to a whole new wave of Chinese companies like Lenovo, Huawei, and Xiaomi. However, things like this really only escalated when businesses in foreign countries, such as the US and the UK, began to migrate their manufacturing processes to China. And the question a lot of people had in their minds at the time was, why China? Doesn't the US have its own factories? Well, the answer is, it's simply much cheaper. The sad and sadistic truth is that each of these Chinese factory workers made as much in a week as an American did in an hour. So you can see why owners were so eager to jump on the opportunity to manufacture their goods in China, and how much cheaper it was than to do it in their own countries. But not everything that came from this was positive. There were also a lot of negatives.
亡くなる1年ぐらい前ぐらいからはもうかなり疲れたっていうことと頭が痛い。
Not only were the Chinese public being taken advantage of, Americans also began to lose their jobs in an increasing number. This was a clear-cut example of how the rich get richer regardless of the circumstances. Citizens on both sides, China and America, struggled to feed their families and support themselves, whilst rich businessmen from America and China profited by cutting costs, and China earned billions every year from imports. It may look like American businesses were losing money at the time from expensive imports, but they saw the bright future ahead of them, filled with profits and taking advantage of hard-working citizens trying to feed their families and giving them pennies in return. The rapid industrial progress in China was a huge W for them, but like anything great in life, it came with sacrifices. And once again, it came at the cost of the health of the Chinese public. And yep, you probably guessed it, it's the huge amount of pollution produced from these factories. And this isn't just another person shouting about climate change and the earth getting hotter. This was a real problem in front of our eyes. China has already become the largest energy consumer, 70% of which comes from coal. And the problem wasn't how much coal China used, it was how concentrated it was in specific zones. Just imagine what local citizens were going through. By 2030, it's estimated that China will produce 12 million metric tons of CO2, almost twice as much as India will. Breathing the air in China will be like smoking 5 cigarettes at the same time. It's insane. Sure enough, world leaders and business owners are benefiting from this. But at what cost? People are slowly dying. And what is a country without its people? Many all over the world have tried to push back against all the greed of these multinational corporations. Many people even tried boycotting Chinese products, but it had no effect at all. The demand for them is simply just too high. In fact, in the past 15 years, it's been the exact opposite. The amount of textile manufacturing that has left China has increased dramatically, and the future of both the manufacturing industry and the Chinese public isn't looking too bright. But there's been a weird change of fate in the recent years. There's been a waiting China. As times are shifting, China is slowly losing its title as the source of cheap labor that it once was. Western brands and retailers are going above and beyond for even cheaper labor alternatives to maximize profits. Countries like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, and other parts of South Asia are now the hotspots for cheap production. But each time there's a change in location for cheap production, the degree of how sadistic and dangerous the conditions are seem to get worse. Factory conditions are ridiculous, terrible payments, people struggling to support their families, factories collapsing, and people dying due to cramped workspaces and poorly looked after buildings. And once again, we're seeing big companies taking advantage of, making poor people work ridiculous hours just to pay them pennies, and then taking the product those workers created and selling them for hundreds or thousands. I mean, look at your favorite Nike shoes or clothes, for example. More than likely, they were made in a cheap factory for no more than a few pennies, yet you bought them for hundreds. When will it stop? It seems like whenever one country or region loses its foothold in taking advantage and sacrificing their citizens' health, the entire situation just moves to another country or region and becomes 10 times worse. You may be asking, why don't we just stop buying these products? But the truth is that it would be extremely difficult for the average person to boycott all Chinese products when crazy statistics like this exist. Did you know that 90% of all electronic goods have products made in China? These are daily products that people rely on and need. But statistics like this really make us wonder, will this sadistic and exploitative cycle come to an end, or will it continue until the entire population suffers?